Each physical trading card has an authentic piece of my suit that I wore for the presidential debate, and people are calling it the knockout suit. I don't know about that, but that's what they're calling it. So we'll cut up the knockout suit, and you're going to get a piece of it.
Hello, Quiet Rioters, and welcome to the politics podcast that likes to leave you in a better mood than it found you. I'm Alex Andreou.
And I'm Kenny Campbell. For 1 week only, I'm being dragged off the substitutes bench to cover for Naomi, who is in Ireland, to brush up on her Arlene Foster impression and bathe in Guinness. Other Irish cliches are available.
We have really loved your comments and encouragement. The way you have embraced our little experiment has inspired us to work harder and harder at making what you want to hear.
If you want even more quiet rioting, do support us in Ko-Fi. We'll pop details in the show notes. But for now, pop your earbuds in, pop your device on Do Not Disturb, and slide serenely into this week's Quiet Riot.
Welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Kenny. This week, Keir Starmer takes to the Rose Garden to remind everyone that he never promised them a rose garden. In fact, his message is so downbeat that we should rename it the moRose Garden. Boom. Ching. Some have appreciated the honesty, most have not. Can Starmer persevere while both right and left take potshots?
And we also look at the US election. Can the Harris-Walz ticket sustain the high after a hugely joyful DNC? And joining us today is one of our very favourite regulars, a woman who doth bestride the world like a colossus, with one foot in Europe and one in the US. It is Time Magazine's Yasmeen Serhan. Welcome, Yasmeen.
That was the kindest introduction I've ever had. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yasmeen, you wrote a fascinating piece about the boycott of products and companies that have links to the Netanyahu regime and the product popping up to fill the void. Why do you think grassroots action like this has been so much more effective this time round?
Well, it's because the war that we're currently seeing in Gaza is unlike anything that we've seen, frankly. I just returned from a trip to Amman in Jordan. I was there just a year ago, and I was completely struck. And that was kind of where the inspiration for this piece came from, by just how noticeable the boycott with, as you were saying, companies that are perceived to have links or support Israel, how strong that was. And you would expect that in the Middle East in particular, where, of course, the situation in Gaza is geographically and emotionally just so much closer to people's hearts. But on my flight with Royal Jordanian, granted, this was my first time flying with Royal Jordanian. This is not an advert. But when the drinks cart comes around, they only basically had fruit juices and alcohol. There were no sodas. And that's because the Coca-Cola company, which owns a lot of drinks, is on the boycott list because they have a factory in an Israeli settlement in the occupied West Bank.
Oh, right.
So they're one of the firms that's been targeted by this boycott campaign. So when I went to the Middle East, which if you've been there, you'll know that sodas are, like most places, very ubiquitous. Coca-Cola, non-existent. Pepsi, same thing.
And about like 30 times sweeter than sodas over here, right?
So I kind of took to just sampling all these different kinds of drinks. I was trying Matrix, which is a Jordanian brand, one called Kinza, which is from Saudi Arabia. And then I come back to London and I see advertised on my Instagram that Gaza Cola is now a thing, being sold at a local Palestinian restaurant.
Gaza Cola.
And there's Palestine Cola as well, which comes from Sweden. I haven't tried that one yet. But yeah, it kind of just got me thinking, what are the long-term ramifications? Because we've seen boycotts like this before. In response to pretty much every war or kind of altercation from the Second Intifada onwards, there's usually a consumer response. Often affects companies like Starbucks, which isn't technically on the boycott list, but they had a bit of a spat with their union, which is why it's involved. McDonald's is another, and that's more to do with actions taken by its franchisee. But, why a company ends up on the list tends to vary from firm to firm. But we've seen these boycotts. But I think what's different and what got me questioning the long-term repercussions is that I'll use my own mother as an example. I don't know if she'll appreciate this, but my mom...
She will love it.
for the longest time was a pretty fervent Starbucks drinker. I mean, I can't tell you how much money she's probably spent at Starbucks. She had her order down to a T. Kind of one of those hilarious orders that's very specific. Yeah. And she's totally given the stuff up completely. And she's found an alternative. And these alternatives, as I mentioned, are popping up. And, consumer habits change, right? And we're creatures of habit. And once habits change, sometimes they're kind of hard to shift back. And the thing is, if this war goes on 10 months, 11 months, 12 months longer, I do wonder if some of these brands are going to be able to recover. If there were a ceasefire tomorrow, as I really wish and hope there would be, but probably there won't, I don't necessarily see people, particularly in the Middle East, but maybe even perhaps elsewhere, rushing back to get their Starbucks or their McDonald's or things like that.
Especially when things have popped up to fill that void.
Exactly. And you know, one has to question whether brands, if they've been associated, what the ICJ has said is a possible genocide, a plausible genocide, and what many people believe to be a genocide, where tens of thousands of people have been killed. Once your brand has been associated with that, rightly or wrongly, to whatever degree, can you come back from that? I don't know the answer.
I realised the impact it was having when OnlyFans got hit, of all the things.
Really?
Adult entertainment platform. And there's a competitor, a UK-based competitor to OnlyFans called MintStars. And they got a spike in users earlier this year. And they tried to work out why they were getting a spike. And it turned out that the OnlyFans founder had been accused of sticking $11 million into a pro-Israel lobby group in the States, or his wife. He denied it. There was a big row, and a whole bunch, I mean, thousands upon thousands of OnlyFans content creators went, we're out of here. You're taking money off us, and you're
taking
using
our porn elsewhere.
My boobies and my bottom are going somewhere else.
But you know what I feel like what that says is that, especially now, and we're in the 11th month of this, your ordinary consumer doesn't feel like they have a lot of agency. Sure, they can donate to a humanitarian organization, maybe throw a few bucks into a GoFundMe to help someone in Gaza evacuate, but they don't have a whole lot of leverage. And, you know, going to protests is one way of demonstrating what people want to happen, but it doesn't lead to an automatic change in policy. Where you spend your money and how you spend it probably gives them a lot of agency at a time where they feel completely powerless.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That there are no companies safe.
We'll drop a link to your piece in the show notes, and it can act as a sort of bridge to the rest of your writing on.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for bringing it up.
Palestine issue. I mean, as soon as they launch Gaza Cola Zero, they've got me. First, it's time to tickle our tonsils with a tongue-twisting traipse through the week's news in 60 seconds. Oh, jinx, the excitement.
Jinx. More guttural.
Is he giving me fucking notes? Right, in 3, 2, what, are you ready? I see you're swiping.
No, I'm swiping it. This damn thing shuts off after 10 seconds. Right, I'm ready now.
In 3, 2, 1, go.
A sexually frustrated dolphin has been blamed for attacks on Japanese swimmers. Less bottlenose, more butthole nose.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has endorsed Trump after revealing Kamala Harris would not even return his calls. Concern grows for his brainworm now that it has run out of food.
Paris welcomed 4,000 athletes for the opening of the Paralympics, which is like the Olympics, only properly hard.
Oasis are reforming in a move that is less top of the pops and more top of the grandpops.
Trump and Harris are fighting over whether to mute microphones during the presidential TV face-off. Hey, Team Trump, can we mute the cameras as well, please?
Consumers have been battered by an increase of 50% in 5 years to the price of fish and chips, costing a tenner on average, but inflation is back down to 2%. Praise God.
The world's oldest man, Liverpudlian John Tinniswood, turned 112. His regular Friday treat is fish and chips, which when he was born cost less than a penny. Holy mackerel.
Ryanair boss Michael O'Leary says passengers should be limited to 2 drinks at airports. If you're about to fly Ryanair, best make those drinks a bottle of gin and a bottle of Buckfast.
The Scottish Government is diverting £5 million from tree planting and nature conservation to pay for wage settlements. It's a magic money tree.
Keir Starmer has ended a $40 million helicopter contract that kept Rishi Sunak in the air. Boris Johnson's chopper has proved more difficult to ground. Stop the clock!
Oh, wow. 1 minute, 27 and a half seconds.
There you go. Easy writing them, isn't it? Not so easy speaking them, is it? Vengeance is mine.
Come back, Naomi. All is forgiven.
Things can only get better, a victorious Tony Blair declared. Things are about to get worse, Starmer said yesterday. Not a message designed to please an audience, admittedly, and guess what? it didn't. Right-wing commentators condemned him for using a fiscal situation that had been obvious before the election as a bid for bringing in the tax rises they always suspected. Left-wing opinion formers flame him for what they see as the prelude to Austerity 2.0. But there are a few who say that bitching about politicians being dishonest while punishing them on the few occasions they are honest creates quite perverse incentives.
Things are worse than we ever imagined. In the first few weeks, we discovered a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. And before anyone says, oh, this is just performative or playing politics, let's remember the OBR did not know about it. They wrote a letter setting that out. And they didn't know because the last government hid it. And even last Wednesday, just last Wednesday, we found out that thanks to the last government's recklessness, we borrowed almost £5 billion more than the OBR expected in the last 3 months alone. That's not performative. That's fact.
Has the Labour claim that things are in a much worse state than anticipated been dismissed too easily? Should we be a little bit more concerned at government's ability to basically hide nasty surprises towards the end of its term?
Starmer immediately pointed to the OBR not even knowing about this. So I think there is some basis for him to say that, look, what we said during the election didn't take into account for that. But I think this notion that, I mean, we all knew this situation was bad. We knew about the NHS kind of being in disrepair. Prisons and things, these were all known quantities. So I guess if you're a lay person watching that, you'll probably be like, hang on, what do you mean we didn't know? Like, of course we knew. That's all we talked about for years.
It's a boring point. It's a sort of accounting point. So sorry, listeners. But what they're talking about here is an in-year gap, which is a really different thing. The money is not there to pay for the second half of this year of quite a lot of stuff. And that's not the same as saying things are in a parlous state more generally. It is a materially different thing to go in and see that literally programs that are currently running, there's not money to fund them next month.
I mean, we've already seen in the early weeks of this new government that, of course, they are having to remind voters of what's come before and kind of pointing to the Conservatives. With this, I mean, it's very easy and quite right to say, look, this government left us with this giant bill. Yeah, I mean, I think on that basis, it's difficult. You can't really argue with that if that's the truth.
The problem is, I guess, that the danger is they'll be caught in a sort of pincer movement between the right wing that hates them for reasons and the left wing that hates them for other reasons. Like I was watching Newsnight on Tuesday night, and the two people they had on, they had Simon Clarke, who used to be Treasury Secretary and then Housing Secretary for 40-odd days under Liz Truss, and also Ollie from Politics Joe. Now, I like Ollie, but that, to me, is not a panel that can discuss government policy because both loathe Keir Starmer and everything he sort of stands for. And you see that replicated time and time again. You see that there are people basically who both think Starmer is Satan, just for different reasons. I don't know, has maybe Labour not handled that well enough? Like they don't seem to send enough ministers and people out there to defend them. There has been an absence. There's been like one person that does the morning rounds.
Did you hear yesterday, Radio 4 asked Labour for a spokesperson and they sent them a recommendation to use somebody from a think tank. There was bemusement in the world at one, going, you know, it's good to have you here, but why are you being put forward as a representative who can speak on behalf of the government? What does it tell us about the government itself? Like I say, it seems to be a feature of what's happening with this government at the moment rather than a bug.
Is it a strategy? Is it a strategy to like take the hit early on in their term, to front load everything, all the bad news, so that by, I guess, 2026-ish, things are visibly getting much, much better?
I mean, when I was watching the speech, the first thing that came to my mind was that this is very clearly an exercise in expectation management. They've just won this stonking majority. Their message was change. Now we, talking about this all the time, know that change is not going to come like that.
Instantly, yeah.
But the country is probably going to start expecting something soon, and they may get tired of hearing, well, the previous government did X and Y. So I think they do actually need to sort of level with people and say, this is the situation we found ourselves in. This is what we inherited that we did not know about.
Yeah.
And we are going to be changed, but it's not going to be easy. And it actually might get a lot harder. And look, if they're wrong and it's not as painful, then people might feel relieved. But I think on the kind of criticisms coming from the left and the austerity point, I mean, Starmer made clear that he was going to commit to the election campaign promise of not raising income tax. So there is this kind of open question of, well, where is that money going to come from? And he was kind of scant on details, at least from what I've seen. And that's a question that's going to have to wait until October.
I think there's been hints, actually. There's been hints that they're going a little bit in the Healy squeeze them until the pips squeak direction. I wouldn't be surprised if the budget that came next included something on land speculation, like people buying and hoarding land without using it, if that were taxed in quite a draconian way. Some windfall taxes, especially for companies that did very well during the pandemic. It might include capital gains tax, and it might include some move on inheritance tax. I think we know that it will include a move on VAT on fee-paying schools, I should say. It was a naive move politically to frame it in this way, in this, things are really terrible and we're going to have to make difficult decisions, because this is a group of people that remembers 2010.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And the moment you say that, the instant reference is austerity. So it is completely reasonable to jump to, they're preparing us for austerity 2.0. But actually the facts of it are not going in that direction. They just gave good raises to public service workers. They seem to not be reversing their commitments to borrowing to invest, which was, if you remember back to 2010, that was the main criticism of austerity. It wasn't that, no one expects people to run a functional deficit, basically, to be spending more than the state is taking in on day-to-day spending, because that's not sustainable. But the criticism on Osborne was that he didn't borrow money at a time when rates were very low to invest it into big projects that would stimulate the economy. That's what Keynesian stimulus is about. And it seems to me that a lot of people are jumping to conclusions, not knowing what is going to be in Rachel Reeves' budget. And when Rachel Reeves' budget comes out, it's going to be nothing like austerity, because I think they will tax wealth to bridge the gap and then splurge a lot on investment, which is perfectly valid as a response to economic hard times.
Quiet, Riot. They've got rid of the fights that they couldn't lose, so that's the public sector pay increases. That's something that they had to clear. There's no way they could go into the next year with that particular fight still happening. But given that we know that there are tough times ahead, Starmer and Reeves are delivering the message almost like the headmaster and the headmistress standing up going, beatings will continue until morale improves. Is that the only way they could have delivered the message? There are different ways of saying there are tough times ahead.
I do agree that I think they probably could have done it in a way that was a bit less scary. Because I think when a leader of your country tells you things are going to get bad, like that just, I mean, for me who has only lived in this country for about 7 years, that's like a throwback to COVID. I'm like, I remember what bad was. I don't want to go to bad. I think, something that strikes me about Starmer, and I remember this when I profiled him for Time last year, he basically told me that, he felt that working people, he said they don't want false promises. They want it fixed. It's a very simple thing for most families. So I think he really abhors the style of Boris Johnson type politics where you're kind of
the booster,
yeah, exactly. Just kind of telling people what they want to hear. He prides himself on being very managerial, very straight-laced, and very to the point. And in a way, if you read his speech like that, you can kind of see that that's maybe what he was trying to do. He's trying to take the British people very seriously. Perhaps he could have done it a bit better.
I mean, I thought he did better in the Q&A afterwards, which was quite interesting. And he kind of always does, actually. So maybe he should sack his speechwriter, because he always seems to do much better in the Q&A. Like when someone asked him about the prison situation, I thought he gave a really, really cogent answer.
I'm not pretending for 1 minute this is a decision I want to make. I spent 5 years prosecuting people and putting them in prison. The idea of releasing people who should be in prison because the prisons are too full and we don't have the places goes against everything I've worked for years. But we've got to face facts. They haven't built the prisons, the last government. They've pretended that you could have longer and longer sentences, send more people to prison, at the same time that you could veto or choose not to have a prison built near you. They were false choices, and here we are without the prison places that we need. So what are the options available to an incoming government? Let the prisons get so overcrowded that we can't arrest people and put them before our courts? Would that have worked in the disorder? I don't think so. This is not a decision that I wanted to take. It's not a decision that any Prime Minister would want to take. And I can't tell you how shocked I was when I discovered the full extent of what they've done with our prisons. And it's going to take time to fix it. I can't build a prison by Saturday. But I shouldn't be sitting in the Cobra room with a list of prison places across the country on a day-by-day basis, trying to work out how we deal with disorder. But that's the position I was put in, and it's frankly not good enough.
Seems to me like fair enough. And if you then have also a limited pot of money, it is also possible that the sort of emergencies you find that you didn't know were that bad will then take precedence.
I think if the predictions that you had for kind of potential policies that they could put forward to help fill that hole come to pass, then I imagine people, primarily on the left, but like kind of everyday working people who don't have to worry about capital gains or things like that, are probably going to be very relieved.
Will they, though? Or will the Telegraph on one side and the Guardian on the other both come out and say, this is the most terrible thing that's ever happened to this country? The lay person will look at those two newspapers and think, well, if they agree...
There's something quite strange about the fact we're still talking in this day and age about the influence that the Guardian and the Telegraph having the same story on the front page have, when America has effectively been run from social media, bypassing that. Is there an opening there? I mean, you come from a world of traditional media. Is this something that you should be talking to Keir Starmer about, saying, look, dude, forget Fleet Street? Yeah, exactly.
Explain it there. I mean, Labour was, I felt like I saw a lot of that. They took TikTok pretty seriously during the campaign. I feel like I saw a lot of, I think you're right that they need to kind of refine their own message, because if they're not able to, again, without giving false hope, put a more positive spin on it, then I don't think they can expect the press to do that.
I wonder if Labour is just reaping the consequences of essentially running a campaign with a manifesto that was so diffuse. They don't really have a mandate for anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wonder if that puts them in a position where everyone can be very justifiably pissed off at them.
North of the border, the devolved government, Holyrood, has got all sorts of problems at the moment, because as well as the belt tightening that's going down in Westminster, they've run out of money up there. And they don't have the option of borrowing, of printing money effectively to pay the bills. So that's why, there are recruitment freezes, there's money being chopped from budgets left, right and centre, because they have statutory duties that rules they have to adhere to.
I mean, you talk about printing money. Richard Murphy, who is someone I have a lot of time for, has written very eloquently about the alternatives. Not pretending that a country's a household or a credit card or any of those things, and saying we need to inject cash into the economy in the right places, and we need to close the tax gaps which exist at the moment, which mean that someone like me pays more tax than someone like Keir Starmer, and someone like Keir Starmer pays more tax than someone like Rishi Sunak. That is backward. I mean, my only concern is that in economic terms, everyone goes to modern monetary theory as a sort of panacea, but actually in an inflationary environment, it can be quite catastrophic. Like when you have highish interest rates and inflation that is only just coming down, actually nudged up a tiny bit last month, pumping loads of money into the economy can backfire very, very quickly. I wanted to ask something else. should we be more aggressive about taxing wealth, actually? It's a Labour government. It's got a big majority. Should they just be a bit more unapologetic about it?
That's where I thought he might be going when he said that those were the biggest shoulders, paraphrasing, but like that should be paying the burden. I was like, oh, here we go. But then, he mentioned non-dom status. I think one would expect an element of that. He can be bold, right, because he has the majority that he has. Yeah. But I think there's a case to be made, as you just outlined, the notion that you would pay more tax than someone like him, than someone like Sunak. I mean, that just feels like a broken system.
The whole notion of trickle down, it just hasn't worked. It hasn't panned out. No. You see it everywhere. So you can't keep persisting with it. And it is that trickle-down notion that powers the idea that rich people can pay less tax because actually they benefit society. And that's not what we've seen. I mean, what we've seen especially in the last 15 years, when economic circumstances have been hard, is we've seen the richest people just protecting their wealth. And your first 100 days with a big majority, maybe it's a wasted opportunity to not go, the situation is bad and I'm going to need to be quite radical about it. Or maybe that's what they're planning to do.
Well, and
we're guessing a lot about a budget that hasn't happened.
And they do have to keep something back for Rachel Reeves to announce come budget time. She has to have a rabbit of some sort, and there has to be something that they can throw out to the country ahead of Christmas.
Yeah. Do you find, because you did spend some time with Starmer, do you find he's the same person that you expected? Has he changed as Prime Minister?
Not that I can tell. I mean, I will say that I had about 30-odd minutes with him in
Play it up, don't play it down, you fool.
30 minutes kind of one-on-one with him, but then a lot of time kind of observing him at Davos in London and of course, Parliament. So no, I feel like I've seen... Yes, I was going to say, I didn't want to use that word, but at Davos it very much felt like stalking him.
You stalked him for a long time until he sat down with you for half an hour.
Yeah, talked to his friends, be like, what's he like? I don't get the impression, nothing surprised me, I guess, put it that way. And I feel like when I was working on that profile and speaking to people who knew him from various points in his life, and granted, these are people who like him, who obviously have a vested interest in saying nice things about him, but like they never sort of led me to think that he actually really fundamentally changed as a person, no matter what position he was in, whether it was Director of Public Prosecutions or leader of the Labour Party and now Prime Minister. The way he's talking about his approach is very much the same, that he's a problem solver, that he's going to roll up his sleeves and kind of just be very serious about it and almost boring. I mean, that was the kind of the signature criticism, if you recall, that he was very boring. And whilst what he was talking about yesterday was, of course, very serious,
he did it in quite it
was a very boring speech.
Even way,
Yeah, I mean, it was a very dull...
That's his style, which I think it can be an advantage, for instance, during the riots, because you don't want someone that will be a bit hysterical and raise the temperature and,
It's what he promised. He promised that politics would, I don't remember the exact wording, but basically kind of just, take up less space in our lives. What he's endeavoring to do is get on with the job of bringing about this change, but in as a non-dramatic way as possible.
I mean, I guess it's just that for the first time, I question the balance of the top team. That's my issue, which I hadn't before. But now that they're in government and the problem appears to be more deep-rooted and worse than anticipated, I look around that top team and I think, who's the risk taker there? Because I see a lot of risk-averse people, a lot of safe people. And actually, if the situation is as dire as they describe, they need someone that will take a few risks. Incidentally, there is obviously another massive story currently unfolding, and that's the reset in UK-EU relations and Starmer's big tour of European capitals. But it is not our style to comment breathlessly on developing stories. So by the weekend, when he will have finished his various visits and a more discernible pattern will have emerged, and we'll have time to have looked at the deal he just signed with Germany, for instance, Naomi and I will devote Sunday school this week to that topic, so look out for it. Now, as you know, we like to give you homework on this podcast in the form of calls to action, and Naomi, I'm sure, is listening out for them because she knows that if she's not here, we're going to slack off. So here's my call to action for this week. Join campaigning organizations that are trying to influence government right now. See who has stalls at the Labour conference coming up. That is a really good guide. So we'll drop details in the show notes. Find a cause among them that represents you and boost them any way you can. And also write to your MP, especially if they're new. Ask them to raise your issues. This is a really key time for influencing policy. They're in their sweet spot. They're all very new, not jaded yet. They're heading to their first budget. This is when government is at its most influenceable. So use this time.
Now it's time for that feature that you hate to love and love to hate. Is this the sound of distant banjos I hear? It must be time for a wokey dokey. Wokey dokey. Alex, what have you got for us today?
So today comes courtesy of Brendan O'Neill and Spiked. I'm not sure exactly what it is he is designating as woke. The title is An Oasis Reunion is exactly what woke bland Britain needs. So maybe it's everything. But strap in, this one is a doozy. He talks about the time when, I guess, he used to have hair.
He does look like John Peel's ghost, doesn't he?
He's harking back to the time when he used to go to Oasis gigs, basically. And he writes, it was a different time. No one was sober curious. No one was gender fluid. No one was getting cancelled for saying, sorry, babe, to the woman they bumped into at the bar. I mean, none of this is true, right? Literally not a word of this. Like, no one was gender fluid. Ziggy Stardust, mate, is calling from the fucking 70s.
From 30 years previously.
Like, what is he talking? There was an entire 80s movement of androgynous pop that was all about gender fluidity. Anyway, it was just men and women and cigarettes and alcohol. Two genders, two vices, and two brothers on stage. So then he lays into basically young people and any music that's come out in the last 20 years, because that's woke apparently. An Oasis explosion, he writes, won't defeat today's culture of conformism, but it might dent it. Who do indie youths have these days? The 1975s? A band whose interests include LGBTQ plus rights and climate change mitigation, which records songs with Greta Thunberg. When the 1975 won the Best Band at the Brit Awards in 2019, their lead singer, Matty Healy, I can't believe what I'm about to write, quoted a passage from The Guardian about how there are too many male misogynist acts in the music business. It's hands down the most offensive thing to ever have happened at the Brits.
Wow.
So there you go. And he goes on and on about, young people. I mean, it is just fantastically vitriolic about, well, I'm going to say it again, anyone with hair. I sense this is an issue for Brendan. I'm sorry to keep mentioning it, but anyway, so there you have it.
So, over the Atlantic for our second topic. Impossible to ignore what's going on over there at the moment, and it's fascinating and horrifying in equal measures a lot of the time. I read a fascinating poll over the weekend, and it was a little bit different. It wasn't looking at issues, traditional issues. It was looking at voters' perceptions of whether Trump or Harris would come out on top when it came to everyday issues such as fashion, eating spicy food, playing poker, arm wrestling, a whole bunch of really random stuff.
Important things, yeah.
But they are the important things, aren't they? I mean, to most of us. Now, Harris blitzed it, of course. they run the same poll a month or two previously with Biden as well. And of course, the difference between how Biden performed and how Kamala performed was quite significant. And as you went through the crosstabs, what was giving Harris a boost was the change in support from her own side. In other words, it was Democrats who were dragging down the score.
Yeah.
Harris has been very light on policy so far. We sort of touched on it earlier. Is there any benefit to her rolling up her sleeves and getting stuck in on policy issues at this stage? Or can she rely on voters continuing to sort of view her more positively in general terms? In other words, can the Harris and Volz ticket sustain the momentum on vibes alone?
I think it made sense for the Democratic National Convention to be a very vibey sort of event. Obviously, they didn't want to, they're probably aware of kind of history of the last Democratic Convention in Chicago not going as well. They're running off the momentum of these being two, despite the fact that one of them is vice president currently, two pretty new quantities in American politics, and that kind of being
they are
100%. Yeah, so they're still riding on that momentum of this is a reintroduction for her, really. And of course, Tim Walz brings so much kind of delightful dad energy. So it makes sense, I think, that they are running on vibes in what was meant to be really a testament. They did not want this to be a divisive moment. They wanted it to be a very strong, very powerful one, and it was. I do not think that the vibes alone, that they should count on vibes alone for the rain. Because November still feels like a long way away. And it is. And I think fundamentally, I think Harris is going to have to walk this tightrope of not really bashing the Biden administration in any way because she's part of that administration, but also putting forward her own kind of platform that distinguishes her. And I think she's done a bit. We've started to see it. I mean, she talked a lot about price gouging. I mean, that's something that, I don't live in the U.S., but I know people who do, and cost of groceries is a big thing. Those are going to be the types of things that really grab people's attention, especially when we get to debate time and we're seeing these two people kind of next to each other. Harris has the benefit of, despite, again, being vice president, she's not been president before. She can kind of communicate a vision and give people this idea of what it could be like. We do have a previous Trump term to look back on and to track what he says he's going to do with his record. And that's where he almost weirdly has this sort of incumbent disadvantage. So I think the vibes are great, but I think if you will rely on vibes alone, that...
I wonder if a lot about that polling is also to do with age.
100%.
Because the things you listed, spicy food and dancing and arm race, no, but seriously, they are things that depend in part on his perception of vitality and kind of vigor. And Trump has gone from a situation where he was seen as the more vital and vigorous of the two candidates to being seen as very much the less vigorous and vital of the two candidates. And having made that such a huge issue for such a long time, it's kind of delicious to see him now being punished for it. Yasmeen, I watched all of the DNC. And I have to tell you, all of it was incredibly joyous to me to see that spread of people look around that room. And all of it was tinged with a little bit of sadness because of you, like specifically, personally, you, because I could not look at that setup and not think that actually all this inclusivity still excludes a group of people, and they are Palestinian-Americans. And that made them all the more excluded in a strange way. If you were at a GOP convention where most people are frowned upon basically, unless you're white middle-class Christian, it somehow makes it better. It creates a community of others. But in the DNC, the community of others was almost just Palestinian Americans. What did that feel like?
It was incredibly stark. And I appreciate you noticing that, because I think when you're in a community that's being excluded, and of course when you see, you want to be part of the joyousness, and this is what's been so tricky, especially for, there will be a lot of Americans, a lot of Democrats, people who basically just don't want Trump. That's, as we saw on that stage, that spans not just Democrats, it's Republicans too, and never-Trumpers and those types of people. You want to be part of that renewed excitement because suddenly it feels like we have a shot. And that's kind of where I think a lot of that momentum was coming from.
And where part of you must be, right?
I think that there are, I think Arab Americans, I hesitate to speak for all of them because, a lot of people are feeling a lot of different things right now. And for Palestinian Americans in particular, even, I think there are going to be people who feel just as demoralized because of the ongoing situation, quite understandably, in Gaza, and those who feel like, oh, finally, here's a candidate that we can move or who might be better. It really depends on who you talk to. But I think the DNC unfortunately missed what could have been an incredible opportunity to platform a Palestinian American. They had the parents of the Israeli-American hostage, Hersh Goldberg Poland, parents who I've interviewed, in fact, who speak incredibly movingly, not just about the situation with their son, but with all the hostages and indeed with the people suffering in Gaza. You had people after that speech, and that speech was heavily supported by people in the Uncommitted movement as well. This movement, as I'm sure listeners know, of Arab Americans and young people, it's a mix of basically Democratic,
people
would-be
who say
Democratic
our
voters.
vote is not in the bag, basically.
Right, exactly.
You have to give
Earn
us
our
something.
vote. These uncommitted Democratic voters who are trying to pressure the Democrats to kind of meet them halfway and are kind of leveraging their vote strategically, as one does in a democracy. So I want to actually quote Peter Beinart, who is a really great American Jewish thinker, because I think he put it really perfectly. If you're a party that claims to believe in equality and you have a very powerful and beautiful representation of Jewish and Israeli pain coming to speak to the convention, and you ignore the side in this conflict that has endured far, far greater destruction and suffering, you are essentially making a statement about human inequality. And I think whilst one can understand why the Democrats may have been skittish about anything that they think could be remotely divisive, they were making that exact statement when they chose not to platform any Palestinian American.
Can I gently push back just to get your reaction?
Yeah, please.
Was it handled in the best possible way by the Uncommitted movement? What do I mean by that? If you set yourself up as a protester outside the convention, are you not deplatforming yourself? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're outside going boo, can you then ask for the microphone?
So that's
if they think, well, you're just going to say boo louder.
Well, actually, so that's the thing. That's not what the Uncommitted movement was doing. And I was actually really pleasantly surprised by how diplomatic and how willing they were to engage with the Democratic Party. And I'm going to just pull from, this was a great piece in The Atlantic that was actually talking about how strategic the Uncommitted movement was being. And I think the Uncommitted movement shouldn't be misconstrued as being the same as all the pro-Palestine and pro-Gaza protests that we've seen.
Right. Because
they're not. But the Atlantic article stated that behind the scenes, Uncommitted had been negotiating with Democratic leaders for days. It was able to secure a first-ever panel at the Democratic Convention about Palestinian human rights. That's a huge win.
Yeah.
Instead of merely protesting behind the security perimeter, their delegates worked the halls, their buttons and keffiyehs, making them a visible presence, and they signed up hundreds of ceasefire delegates supporting the movement's demand for a permanent ceasefire. So to the contrary, I actually think that the Uncommitted movement, but particularly the individuals within it, and I'm thinking of one woman who I was not aware of until now, and I'm really, it's unfortunate the circumstances that make one aware of someone, but the Georgia state lawmaker, Ruo Roman,
yes,
a Palestinian-American lawmaker.
I saw her speak a few times on network.
She was kind of seen as a potential, and indeed as a potential speaker. Would the DNC kind of concede to that ask? And they were asking, right? The protests that we saw that happen outside were in response to them. And I should also note, they weren't the only ones asking. You had various American Jewish organizations asking. You had Israeli Americans asking, saying, and the Uncommitted movement said rightfully, the Hersh Goldberg Poland's parents deserve to be on that stage to talk about the pain and suffering that they're experiencing. It would only be right and fitting and actually really quite moving and make that case for a ceasefire that they've been making to have a Palestinian American up there as well. And I couldn't think of anyone better than Representative Roman. I read her draft speech, and I couldn't find anything objectionable with it. She endorsed Harris. She spoke about her own experiences, these speeches do, and she made this impassioned case for a ceasefire to end the suffering. So I think they were actually willing to meet them halfway and were willing to be diplomatic and to play the game of politics. I don't think that these were people who were there to protest as such.
A conversation about having a speaker, about that symbolism and what it would do. Because again, this was symbolism, right? We were willing to take something back that was a symbol, even though it wasn't necessarily policy, to show not just how there is space for us in this party, And instead, I watched somebody from my state who was an anti-choice Republican get time on that stage and not a single Palestinian suggested speaker. So what I'm about to read to you is frankly very sanitized. It was meant to have an opportunity to represent a Palestinian voice. But I'm incredibly dismayed because we came here to offer a gift. We came here to offer an opportunity to bridge the gap between our party and our voters. It's very unfortunate. My name is Rua Roman, and I'm honored to be the first Palestinian elected to public office in the great state of Georgia. Right. And the first Palestinian to ever speak at the Democratic National Convention. My story begins in a...
I think the fact that they were excluded was a misstep. I don't think it's something that can't be fixed in the weeks and months ahead, but the fact that this was their, that's why I call it a missed opportunity more than anything.
Because her position on Gaza has slightly shifted from Biden's, hasn't it? Almost the atmospherics are slightly different.
There are some rhetorical changes, and I think a key difference that isn't said but observed is that Biden has this almost ideological, decades-long support for Israel. That Harris, just being of a different generation, from a different generation of politicians, doesn't have in the same way. So on that basis alone, I think Harris is going to come at this a little less emotionally.
Yeah.
And I think that opportunity to get her to shift a little, it goes without saying.
And I've also seen some statements about, she's asked about this issue and she responds with vague things, but vague things around the concept of the rule of law. And that says to me that she might be more willing to consider, the arms sales issue from a legal point of view.
And it remains,
rather than from a purely geopolitical point of view.
And that's a central ask, right? At least if not like a full-on arms embargo, which I think, and I remember reporting on this, I think people within this movement have to be realistic about what is possible. But certainly conditioning aid, as has been called for, not just by people on the left, but pretty mainstream Democrats, is a serious thing. Now, whether she would come out and say she's going to do that before an election, I'm a bit dubious. But I think the Uncommitted movement recognizes that there's room there.
What's their leverage, Yasmeen? Because the thing is, this is a binary election, right? You're either going to get Harris or you're going to get Trump.
Their leverage is their votes. It's Michigan.
Okay.
And that's why they have to play it.
But what do they get instead? That's the bit that I can't work out. And it's actually the bit that does my head in about the left here as well. I saw an Arab American Democrat, part of the Uncommitted movement, on MSNBC the other night. And she was saying, if Trump gets elected, that's on you. Yeah. If you don't manage to get our votes and Trump gets elected, that's on you. But Trump's policy on Israel and Gaza will be like...
Could it be worse?
100 times worse.
This is the thing.
100 times worse.
Well, what would he... I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying that, if you're talking to people, many of whom may have family members in Gaza... I had a source yesterday die, from shrapnel in an airstrike, and he was in a safe zone. The thing is, when you're talking about people for whom... it couldn't get fucking worse. I don't know if I can swear.
Yeah.
It's even if on an intellectual level you could concede that Trump may even be more heartless, in their minds, the fact that the U.S. continues to send billions of dollars in aid that are killing tens of thousands of their family members and stuff, in their minds.
Get worse though. All right, let me.
Of course, things
counter.
can always get
worse. Let me
worse,
counter.
But
for instance, the Biden-Harris administration is trying for a ceasefire deal. They are negotiating. They are
negotiating,
moving
but unless
behind the scenes, right?
They are negotiating. But
Trump
this is the thing.
wouldn't. Trump would just say to Netanyahu,
"Get the job done."
Eliminate them.
That's what he said. But this is the thing: trying for a ceasefire and saying Israel's accepted these terms, Hamas has. This is the thing. In their minds, it hasn't ended the hostilities. Aid is human rights organizations are showing that aid isn't getting in as nearly as much as should. But if anything, it's reducing. The thing is, that's not a great get out the vote strategy. The thing is, things are horrible. Things are so dire right now. But if you don't vote for me, it's going to get so much worse. The thing is, what I imagine that person, having not watched that MSNBC segment, was saying is, you need to earn our vote. We're giving you an opportunity to earn our vote. And you kind of have to understand that if their vote is the only leverage they have to play it.
I understand that. I just don't think it's leverage. I don't. it feels to me like ultimately those people will vote for Harris-Walz. The alternative being someone who banned flights
I think their
from
alternative.
Arab countries.
I think their alternative in their mind is simply not voting. Again, I can't speak for all
Maybe,
Arab Americans.
maybe.
There are a lot of Arab American Christians, a lot of Arab American Muslims, a lot of right-wing Arab Americans.
The alternative to Harris being elected is Trump being elected, and that is someone who is openly hostile, not to Palestinians in Palestine, to Arab Americans in America.
I
So
hear you.
that
I hear
has
you
the
there, but
potential to make life considerably worse for the people living in that country.
Yes, but you have to recognize that what they're not saying, or we're going to vote for Trump. They're saying, here's your chance to earn our vote. We want to vote for you. Give us a reason. This is what utilizing leverage is. It's the thing is, I think Democrats and people who are supportive of Harris-Walz needs to get it out of their head that you can just threaten voters by saying my opponent's insane.
Yeah.
And that may have worked the first time in 2020, but that is not a good get out the vote strategy. You can't fit that on a bumper sticker. And I think the thing is what they're asking for, and what I think any voter would ask for, is earn my vote. I'm telling you how. At least meet me halfway and try to earn my vote. And the thing is, I'm not putting a value judgment on it. I can sympathize with that argument because what else do they have? Especially given what's going on right now. If in their mind, if things are already so horrible and yes, things could certainly get worse, but this is their opportunity to make it get better, then they need to threaten something that actually Harris and Walz would take seriously, which is Michigan. And the thing is, one thing I also think is worth explaining, and I feel like I can understand this more as a Palestinian-American who's speaking with other Palestinian-Americans, is that for so many people, this is such an emotional issue that like you can't tell them that they have to vote for a ticket that may just continue the policies that we've already been seeing. You can't ask them to sign off on a policy that has killed their family members. And even if they're not exactly their family members, for Palestinians, all Palestinians feel like family members. So if you've lost 40,000 people, then, it's just really hard to tell them, like, you have no choice. You need to just get with it. I'm not discounting the fact that one could say rationally that a second Trump administration would be horrible for a lot of people. But I think what they're trying to do is play the game of politics. They're trying to say, we have something you want. We have something we want. Meet us halfway.
That's really beautifully defended and actually much better expressed than I've heard it before.
Oh, thank you.
But it's true because
it's something I think about a lot.
Because the notion that you might end up with a second Trump term, what I'm saying is it's high stakes.
It's very high stakes, but I think also you have to understand that as an Arab American or a Muslim American or a person of color, there is something kind of tinged about being told because you're this way, because you look the way you look, you have to vote a certain way. In their minds, they're like, what makes you any better than the right, really?
Do you know what this is? This is such a great example of the importance of talking to people who actually know what they're talking about. It's not sound bites, it's not spin, it's just talking to people who actually have a dog in the fight.
Riot. The other thing we've seen, Yasmeen, is that there's been an explosion of voter registration, especially in swing states, right? And the breakdown of that voter registration is hugely slanted towards women, towards people of color. A lot of the states have partisan registration. Like you can register to vote as a faithful of a particular cause, then you get to take part in the primaries and stuff like that. So we know that the difference is about a plus 20% for Democrats. And also we know that women disproportionately vote Democrat, people of color disproportionately vote Democrat.
It's all the cat ladies. They're registered.
Yeah. And also that women vote more than men.
Are you surprised? I'm just
kidding.
No, sorry, that was me.
I'm not surprised, actually, but I'm delighted.
Yeah.
But I'm delighted that it's statistically significant. So the cat lady stuff, why are they sticking by that? Like he's been given opportunity after opportunity to walk it back a tiny bit.
So he did back off a little bit.
Did he?
But he kind of was like, I'm sorry if I caused offense. Like
no,
sort of, which is not really...
But he was like, I'm sorry if you're thick and didn't get my joke.
And he was like,
That's
I was being sarcastic.
Exactly. I'm sorry if you didn't get the finer points of my wit.
The Census Bureau estimates there are 22 million women between the ages of 20 and 40 who, for whatever reason, do not have children. What do you say to those women who hear some of your comments, including the childless cat lady comments, which you've been asked about, but who feel as though you won't represent them?
And I want to represent everybody. And yes, I made a sarcastic comment years ago that I think that a lot of Democrats have willfully misinterpreted. But what I've simply said is that I think that it's really a profound change that's happened in our country where we become anti-family.
Let me zoom out a little bit.
Please.
You're calling it a sarcastic comment.
Sure.
And yet, some women, and you got the feedback in real time, felt like it was a gut punch to them personally. Do you regret making that comment?
Look, I regret certainly that a lot of people took it the wrong way, and I certainly regret that the DNC and Kamala Harris lied about it.
But do you regret what you said, Senator?
Look, Kristen, I'm going to say things from time to time that people disagree with. I'm a real person. I'm going to make jokes. I'm going to say things sarcastically. And I think that what's important is that we focus on the policy. Those sarcastic comments were made in the service of a real substantive point. This country has become too anti-family.
But again, just very quickly, given that people have told you directly, have spoken out, have said that they were offended, they were hurt by those comments, do you wish you never made those childless cat lady comments?
I think that it's much more important for me to just be a normal human being who sometimes says things that people disagree with. I have a lot of regrets, Kristen, but making a joke 3 years ago is not at the top 10 of the list.
I don't understand the strategy. Like, are they hoping that there is such a misogynistic undercurrent in the country that they will actually gain more men voters than they lose women voters?
I think he seems, the calculus must be, and I don't even know necessarily that Trump shares these views, because I seem to remember when he was asked about it, he was like, oh, well, yeah, like he said something, like he didn't like kind of co-sign to be like, oh yeah, and he's absolutely right. Like, yeah. I think this is a J.D. Vance problem. But yeah, I mean, he must be running under the belief that there is a group of voters, on or offline, who fundamentally believe that these women who choose not to have children or cannot have children are kind of a problem, and maybe he thinks, think if I'm being generous, that he's making this sort of pro-family argument. But if you really wanted to make a pro-family argument, and he kind of alluded to this, where he basically said, like, look, I know that there are these, because I don't want to paraphrase him, because if anything, I think I might make it sound better than it was, but he was kind of nodded to the fact that there are young women for whom having a child for financial or professional reasons would be really difficult.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. I think if you came at it from a compassionate way where you're like, look, we need to support young women and young families in doing that, that's one thing. But mocking them and making them a joke and referring to them as cat ladies is another. So he's clearly not speaking to a woman. No woman I've ever met talk.
Maybe that's the issue.
Yeah.
That the lack of diversity within their election campaign team is actually affecting their election campaign, because they're not getting the plurality of views that they need going into the strategy.
Yeah, because I think if they had a young woman advising them and explaining,
they should go, shut up.
Yeah.
Just say sorry and shut up.
Yeah, and like kind of just put this to bed really quickly. Or the couch. Sorry.
One final teeny question. So, massive amount of money has been raised. Like, they raised $100 million during the DNC alone, and that puts the Democrats now on $550 million raised. That's over $500 million since Harris took over. How do they spend it? There's a massive debate at the moment whether it should predominantly go to ads or to digital or to on the ground. There are a lot of people saying that the only thing that matters is your ground game.
Yeah, like getting people to chat to each other. And I think there's a case for that. I mean, look, if you have that money, it's not like you have to ration, right? Like, it's not like you could probably do a mix of it. And I think a mix is probably good. Look, I think the voter registration to me is indicative of the fact that there were probably a lot of people who were kind of dreading this election for one reason or another, who now have a reason to be excited again. And there are many people who already know which way they're going. I'd say probably the majority. But there will be a lot of people for whom maybe they're still deciding. And I think having those conversations and having that engagement is going to be really important. So, yeah, I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't just do all of it. I saw some pretty hilarious posters when I was in Wisconsin recently.
And put it into humanitarian relief for Gaza.
I think, whatever sort of goodwill gestures they can give between now and the election to indicate that they're serious. And look, you don't have to fundamentally change policy. You have to just enforce U.S. law. That's it, really. That's it. You're a prosecutor. You can do that.
Right, we work day and night on this podcast. This is not an exaggeration. We do literal all-nighters to edit the episodes, and we put it out with love and free to everyone. So if you are someone who can afford a one-off donation or a monthly $5 or more to help us hire an engineer so we can improve the technical quality and sleep occasionally at night, please do so on ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. No, not later. You're going to forget. At least open the tab. Do it now. We will wait. Thank you. And that's the end of this week's show. May I say a massive thank you to our guest, Yasmeen Serhan.
Thank you for having me.
Yasmeen,
Pleasure as always.
I hope I didn't push you too hard,
Oh
right?
my gosh,
we
no.
had a nice ding-dong.
Oh, I mean, as we were discussing before the show, I
Yeah.
feel like when you're Arab, you just start yelling, you just start raising your voice a bit. No, it's a great
no
conversation
problem with your
as
volume
always.
levels today.
And thank you to all you guys out there for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, to leave us a review, and to send any ideas to quietriotpod@gmail.com.
And finally, let me remind you, if you have any cash left after Sir Keith has stolen it all to give to Thatcher's ghost, did I mention that you can now pop a few quid our way via Ko-Fi? Look out for Naomi's return from Friday with a review of Alien Romulus, and Sunday in our Starmer Hearts the EU special. Stay quietly riotous. Speak soon.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreu and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangita, artwork by Simona Canelu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot. I've got a really bad habit of once I'm live, my volume level goes up 25%. It's performance mode. So you might just find yourself getting angry and talking over me anyway. Like, shut up.
Steve often makes a joke, particularly when I'm on the phone with my mother, that I don't need the phone.
Yeah.
She can hear me.
Oh, yeah, actually.
From miles away.
Actually, don't be more American, be more Palestinian.
Be very Arab, okay.
Because
I just came back from the Middle East, so I can do that.
Do you code switch? Do you change your accent when you're talking to your family?
No, it just get louder. Just the volume just goes up and the yelling is a bit. But we're like, we're never arguing. No, this is just the way we talk.
This is just enthusiasm for life.
Yeah.
Oh, that same thing happens to me all the time. Like, my boyfriend will come and try and console me. Because genuinely, because they think I just had a massive falling out with my sister or something. It's like, what are you talking about?
Is he British?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, no.
What? We're exchanging recipes or something.